So I told you to watch the film Coraline, and then I wanted to discuss on it. The specific elements, the specific psychoanalytic elements that are included in that. So
Hmm.
tell me, what kind of emotions did you get when you first experienced it, when you first watched the movie?
My main emotions or the emotions I got in the end? I mean, during the movie or at the end?
Were there any specific scenes that just took your attention, to like a stronger degree than the rest?
If we're talking about the movie in a thrilling sense, there were some scenes like the one where her mother was chasing her down the tunnel, for example, which was kind of anxious.
Yeah, like you mean the scene that the spider web emerged and that she was basically.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, and she tried to escape,
yeah, like the
and the mother
final
was chasing.
the final
Yeah,
conflict in the film, basically.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that I think that when I was in my childhood, and I was remembering a scene over and over, I think that was it. It was like
Hmm.
the whole reality of the world of Coraline, which was basically a false paradise, just crumbled, and everything underneath just erupted into basically a small hell. And the spider web
Hmm.
was like a representation, of the destruction of that world. That
Yeah.
and an unmasking of sorts, of the actual reality of the mother, of the other mother.
Yes,
Well,
and you get it earlier in the movie also when she starts to realize that something is going wrong.
hmm hmm you remember one part in the movie where like she follows the mice, then the mice have a symbolic character in the film and in literary tales. So the mice,
Hmm.
she chases the mice, if I remember correctly, and the mice go into
Hmm.
the other world, through the little door, and then
Yeah.
Coraline follows them. But when she arrives, she sees the mother cooking, and the mice are
Hmm.
basically dead because there was the implication that she
Hmm.
killed them or that she cooked them. One of those two. It wasn't very,
Yeah.
very clear in the movie. So if you go back into the beginning of the film of Coraline, do you remember a specific part where she pretended to be a mage, a witch of water? That was the
In the beginning.
yeah. Do you remember that?
Yeah, yeah,
Do
yeah.
you know the scene?
Yes, yes, yes.
So basically, she was adopting an archetype there. So I don't know if you remember, but in Christianity there are some very close. How can I say? There are some very interesting things when it comes to water, and water master. So, for example, Jesus walks on water.
Hmm. Yeah.
Moses splits the ocean in half so that they are able to escape from the Pharaoh, if I remember correctly.
Hmm.
You
Yeah,
are
yeah.
you are baptized in water, so basically it's like you are alive, you're born, from your mother, and then
Hmm.
when you're baptized, you're basically reborn again. You go underneath the water, and then you arise again,
Hmm.
and this is your
Yeah.
your religious awakening, or your religion, or your the beginning of your religious identity,
Hmm.
and then you are depending on then from which branch of Christianity you're either saved or you have the potential, let's say, to provide salvation to the rest of your brothers and the salvation of the world. You participate in that. So I think, if I remember correctly, Catholicism, has the idea that baptism saves your soul, from the moment
Hmm.
it's done. But I think Orthodoxy, for example, has a more active role. That the beginning of the baptism is the beginning of your journey, to be part of the solution, or the redemptive solution to the tragedies of the world. So there is
Okay.
this like dual aspect there from the different branches of Christianity. So in the beginning of the movie, she was basically a master of water. And
Hmm.
I mentioned that water has specific religious connotation. It's also there in alchemy. It's also there in Buddhism. So it's one of the four
Yeah.
elements. So water is, and it's also the thing that sustains you. So water is very important. And Jung
Hmm.
noted that dreams that included water, or symbolism that included water, that if
Hmm.
you looked at it psychoanalytically and if you follow the symbolism, the water was the same as the unconscious.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
this is what he got. So because and if you even if you imagine, like, the world of the unconscious, is like an ocean. So there is like the surface level, which is like the conscious level, and then there is the underwater level, which is the underworld, which is the under level. So in that relation, Jung, with his how would you say, his very unique interpretation, he managed to, at least in some degree, provide the role, how can I say, baptize the water in some sense as the symbol of the unconscious. This is how he did that. And there are some explanations which I'm not very familiar, but I'm gonna explain afterwards what exactly this means in relationship to the movie. So Coraline
Okay.
is the master of water. This is the beginning of the movie. This is the archetype, the role play she decides to play, and then she meets some other people, and then she basically goes into her house and she sees that her parents are completely unwilling to provide her with any sort of fun because they are completely busy with work and everything. And then she just finds the magic door, and the magic door is the magic door is basically another symbol of the unconscious, because what happens is there are two interesting things there. The Coraline, in order to be able to go to the other world, it has to be night. She has to have fallen asleep, and she needs to go through the magic door.
Yeah.
These are the three conditions that have to happen. And what happens is the other world is exactly the opposite of what her conscious world is.
Okay.
Well,
But those conditions break later in the movie, right?
yeah, exactly. This is but the initial conditions. But what happens is that as the movie progresses, the worlds of the underworld and the world, collapse into one, basically, and they get
Yeah.
and the lines between them become all the more difficult to distinguish. Which
Yeah,
is
yeah, yeah.
which is what happens also in real life, because there are people who are how can I say, if you look close enough to your own personal situation, you will understand that there are a lot of things in your own unawareness that the more they come into your consciousness, the more they're going to start merging together. So there is an idea that the more aware you become of the things that you were previously unconscious, that there is going to be a clash between the old content of your consciousness and the new content that arises, and then there is going to be like a mix between the two. So there is an idea there about that.
Okay.
So the first connection to the movie is that Coraline goes into the world, she has to sleep, and obviously when you sleep, you go into a dream world, and everyone, at least now, we accept that when you dream, you're basically in, a loose association between memories, you can imagine. And a lot of people, or at least that's how we see it, is that the dream world is the place of the unconscious, is the manifestation of the unconscious in imagistic form, in which you can retrieve after you awaken, which is a very weird thing because it doesn't always happen, but sometimes it does happen with high intensity.
Yeah.
So
Correct.
the relationship with the unconscious is not exactly very, how can I say, it's not very established. It's something that's episodic, and it's something that you can grasp, but it's not something that you can consciously manifest, because, for example, you can say, well, I want to dream tonight, and maybe you will not dream, and sometimes you have no obligation about something like that, and you have a spectacular revelation, about something that is going on into your mind, and that is actually of helpful significance towards your life in general, depending on the person you are and depending on the situation. So this is the first part of the dream. The movie is Coraline goes into the other world, and she finds that it's basically a fantasy world. It's a self-fulfilling fantasy. She has, her parents are perfect. They
Yeah.
have life. They have spontaneity. They are non-rigid. Everything she tastes is as she would like it. So it's basically like the other mother is tapping into the how can I say, the storehouse of her desires, of Coraline's desires, and manifests them throughout the movie in the best way possible in order to grip her. This is the
Yeah.
this is the idea that's unfolding later on. And there is, man, I'm gonna explain some really insane symbolism after, but this is the main thing to grasp. That the initial relationship with the the other mother, which is being established. One of the other things you have to you will understand where I'm going with this a little bit later. But when she first entered into the world, she asks to the other mother, "Who are you?" And she says, "I'm your other mother." And she says, and she was kind of confused about that. And then the mother says, "Everyone has another mother."
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
We all have another mother, because you have the real mother, and then you have the
Yeah.
archetypal mother. So you have the conscious representation of your mother, and you have the unconscious representation of your mother. And
Oh,
this is what the archetype is a dualistic form. It's not something that is only negative, and it's not something that is only positive.
okay. Yeah.
And you will see that in the beginning of the movie, the real parents are depicted as like completely indifferent to the demands and the needs of Coraline. And what happens is, as the movie continues, the archetype switches places, because the parents are actually given a favorable interpretation the later of the movie, and the reverse happens for the mother. So there is like a switching of places of the archetype. So the positive becomes the negative, and the negative becomes the positive. So
Yeah.
this is a very interesting point. When I was initially into when I was watching, for symbols in the play, because that show, like, I think it haunted me for at least maybe more than 10 years, something like this. And then you reminded me of the title when I was asking you about that movie, and that's why I was tempted since then to watch it. And when I actually rewatched it, with everything that I knew about analytical psychology, I thought that it was an absolute treasure mine of symbolic and literary interpretation. So I don't know how many times Coraline went. I don't know if you remember. Do you remember the total amount of times that Coraline passed through the door?
At first it was three because in the end the mother asks for the three wonders she created for her. If you remember,
Yeah.
at the end there was a game they played, the challenge.
Mhm.
So she could find the three eyes, and she hid the three eyes of the kids, the previous kids, in the three wonders she made: the garden, then the play with the actresses,
Right.
and the guy with the circus, Mr.
So,
Bobinsky.
so you remember the name? Well, that's good. Yeah,
Yeah.
Russian, right? And you're Russian.
Yeah, yeah.
Let's discuss about this. So, are you? So, I'm pretty sure the total amount of times is either 3 or 4. I'm not really sure about that. The
The
total.
total times.
Yeah, that she went into the world. I don't remember exactly though. I don't think it's three.
Total should be five, I think.
Five. I
No? I think.
1, 2, 3,
There
four
were
or five. Yeah.
three. Yeah.
So here's something interesting. Now, if it's five, obviously it kind of invalidates what I'm about to say. But what happens in this type of movies is that usually, like, they're like the arcs are split into like three specific main events, and then there is a fourth one which finalizes the sequence. So you have the first act, the second act, the third act, and the final act. So the third act and the fourth act. So this is very common, actually, even in other kinematographic, let's say, representations of children's fairy or children's movies or fairy tales, children's books or fairy tales. Like, they're so it's very consistent. That pattern: 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. It's always like this. There are some
Yeah.
there are some interesting things to say about it, but I'm just gonna keep it like this in order not to run into some kind of numerological rabbit hole, and then we're not gonna be able to get out of it, and it's a little bit more difficult to explain. So what happens is this: the first thing that I was very interested when I was seeing the movie was, she said, everyone has another mother, and that's a complete. I don't know if the guy who wrote this had read Jung or anything. It's not impossible, but that was a very, very, very telling sign, when I was watching it. So I don't, like I said, I just can remember the many things that I can see. So what happens is, Caroline is the hero. What happens is that the mother, the other mother, and the other father are basically the shadow sides of the of the real parents. There are the real parents, and then there are the fake parents, or the
Yeah.
exactly fake. It's more like, how can I
Another
say?
version of them?
Um,
What about the other father, by the way? Sorry, but
Here's something interesting. The world was controlled by the other mother. She was the queen of
yeah,
the other world.
exactly.
That's the evil queen archetype, and that's a very common archetype. So this is why I wanted to discuss this, and this is why the video is gonna be titled "The Devouring Mother" or an analysis of the devouring mother in Coraline, because
Okay.
the archetype, the actual archetype that is being discussed is the archetype of the devouring mother. So the devouring
Mm-hmm.
mother is actually something which Freud was looking into when he was trying to analyze psychopathology in the familial landscape. So
Okay.
imagine you are a mother and you are in a household. So if you are if you represent or if you're possessed by the archetype of the devouring mother, you're basically using your nurturing nature in order to capture your children into your web, like this happens later in the movie, and you
Mm-hmm.
just want to trap them in there forever.
Yeah.
And this is a real thing. This is not a metaphor. You literally want to do that. So
Mm-hmm.
I have, and this can take form in various ways, and some of them are more satanic and diabolical than others, and some of them are more, how can I say, more innocent, although they're
Mm-hmm.
never innocent. But for
Yeah.
example, I have one friend of and my mother's friend, he's like 33 years old and he's still stuck in his mother's house, and he has
Mm-hmm.
zero sense of responsibility for his own life, zero direction, and he blames everything on his parents, and they basically just keep sustaining him and giving him there, and who knows, maybe he's gonna be there until he's 45.
Okay, that sounds kind of sad.
It is sad. And then there is the other part where the mother literally, maybe it's a single mother, maybe it's a mother in the family, just wants to keep her daughter or her son or her children, to herself, and to basically put an end into the development of their life, of their livelihood. So they always remain her children, so they never graduate from the role of child into adult. So
Okay.
that leap never happens. So there was, I remember, I had a discussion with Michael and one of my other friends, and he was telling me about his girlfriend, and his girlfriend was in a very, very weird household, and she told me that the mother there was like a dictator, and her whole
Mm-hmm.
mission in her life was basically to keep her daughter from attaining any degree of independence. So
Yeah.
she wanted to go out with Michael to do, boyfriend and girlfriend stuff. And what she ended up doing, it was sending them to so many trivial assignments. Let's say, oh, I wanted to go pick up this and I wanted to pick up this. And it was some kind of like gathering material for the sake of storing them. Like, let's say, like, they were going to discount stores and they were buying things that had absolutely zero actual value, just for the
Mm-hmm.
sake of disturbing the flow of the relationship. And she did that
Yeah.
so cunningly, she did that so continuously. So what happened was that he and her, they couldn't really develop as a couple, and she, was stuck in the lies that her mother fed her, and there were some really, like
Mm-hmm.
some they had a very strong fascist element into them. And this is a real story, this is not a reality. So this is another, depiction of the archetype. So
Mm-hmm.
Freud was very aware of the drum of the pathological side of the nurturing mother, which is you can nurture a child to the point where you fatten them, like the candy house story, the famous
Yeah.
candy
Yeah.
house
Yeah.
story.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
They are not able to move their body to get away out of the house. That's the point. And that's
Okay.
the mission of the devouring mother. And this is what happens in Coraline, but it happens like, the first thing that she offered her was treats.
Oh, true. I
It's
didn't notice.
because it's basically the retelling of the story of the candy
Okay.
house story. It's just another variation of that, and that candy house variation is another variation of all the other things that you're seeing in a pathological situation with a family. And it's not the only pathological. You can have a tyrannical father, or you can have a devouring mother, and there are other things in between. But the devouring mother, I think it's like one of the most, in a society that is dominated by feminine symbolism and by, let's say, the
Mm-hmm.
demand for equality, that archetype has more strength than the tyrant right now.
Okay.
That's another point that we're going to go in the end. So this is what you see. So she's being fattened, let's say. She doesn't actually get fat, but she's being
Yeah.
lured in by food, that's the thing. And then she's lured in by entertainment and novelty and by, like another thing that was very interesting, because here's the secret about the devouring mother. The secret is
Mm-hmm.
not that the child is the victim of the mother.
Yeah.
It's actually more like a conspiratorial contract they're entering into with one another. So what does this mean? It means
Yeah.
that Coraline was half aware of what was going on with the pathological situation,
Mm-hmm.
but she chose to go through it even though it bothered her consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
At some point, her friend, who was introduced in the conscious world, she was basically reincarnated, as a subhuman version, of him, in the fake world, in the other world, with his mouth sealed.
Yeah.
So the mother took away his voice in order to make him appropriate for to being around with Coraline, because Coraline was annoyed by him. So
Mm.
that's another, and she saw that and she was kind of disturbed, but she was like, okay, well, like maybe it's an improvement, over the original version, which is
Mm-hmm.
which is what you do in an authoritarian environment. By the way, you accept the little tyrannies that you see, until at some point you are so deep into the rabbit hole, where you cannot actually get out. This is what happens to
Yeah.
Coraline. So what happens is that these events take place, and all of this bizarre entertainment, and in the middle, Coraline actually also communicates with the people in the quote unquote real world. Technically, neither the real world or the other world are fake or real because they're a movie. But we understand
Mm-hmm.
what we mean about real and fake. They're representations of conscious reality and of unconscious reality. So
Mm-hmm.
when he's in the conscious world, when he's the world, if you see in most of the movie, when she's in the conscious world, then it's day, and when she's in the other world, or when
Mm.
she's in the dream world, it's night always.
Yeah. Yeah. True.
Um, she consults with many characters, and they kind of give her like cryptic messages about the underworld, and in some sense,
Mm-hmm.
when you're communicating with someone who is on the, how can I say, which has a certain degree of relationship with the unconscious forces, they're going to give you cryptic messages in order to explain to you what kind of things you should look out for, let's say in dangers, and what things you should look out as opportunities.
Yeah.
So, for example, this is why I'm also a very big proponent of someone to actually look into their dreams, because the characters in the show were speaking like dream characters. They had this ambiguous element, and you couldn't understand what was to be taken seriously and literally, and what to be taken metaphorically and, like curiously. You couldn't really make
Mm-hmm.
a distinction. And in the dream, is the same thing. You see things in a dream, and on first glance, you can't really understand what they mean. They have this cryptic code encoded into them. But
Mm-hmm.
but if you are careful and if you actually see the dream and where they lead, then you can actually discover, let's say, the hidden treasures and the hidden messages and the practical and valuable information they can actually provide you, so you can actually carry it into the real world where you can actually extract the treasure that they are hiding. So
Mm-hmm.
that's the interpretation that Jung had, which was a very interesting one, and I have been experimenting with it with, I would say, a relevant degree of success in these cases. So the
Uh-huh.
movie the movie progresses. So this is the archetype of the devouring mother, in a nutshell. I'm not going really to go in too much into it with all the variations, because that's gonna take like 20 hours. So, but this is the idea. The idea is that it exists. It really exists. I've seen it. People can see it if they watch, and depending on what kind of relationship they have with their mother, the more the mother, the role of the mother is nurtured until the child has the potential for independence. This is the role of the mother. So the mother has to stop being a mother at some point,
Yeah.
with what we mean by that. And and that's the sacrifice of the mother. In order for the child to grow, the mother has to accept that her role has been fulfilled, to the degree of nurture, like as the nurturer between the ages, let's say, of 0 and the ages of, let's say, 15 or 18, depending on how much you think that process is gonna develop. But the devouring mother refuses to sacrifice her role as the mother, as the authority on the child's life. Because when you're a mother, you have the authority on the child. The child doesn't have the authority on you. That's another pathology. But you have there is a necessary degree of authority that you have in order to guide their actions, so they're not completely antisocial and pathological, and so that the child can actually grow to be social and to socialize it and to be able to create meaningful relationships. So that's a
Yeah.
very fundamental role. But if that extends, beyond 18, whatever the other age is, and you keep sheltering the child and you keep saying it that, well, they don't really have to grow up, and they don't really have to grow to grow into their own adventure, then you slowly become, that tyrannical, spider that was found at the end of the movie, if you're the mother. And that's a fate that is really, really terrible. Okay.
Right.
So that's the
Yeah.
point. Yeah. So what happened was, man, here's the part where the movie gets satanic. I think that this is. I mean, it was pretty satanic before, because like, if you like the buttons for eyes, that's not the most. That's not the most
Yeah. Friendly,
friendly,
good-looking
family.
mother.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you wouldn't say it like, well, when you watched it, you kind of like, even Coraline was kind of scared, by that. So what happened is that the other mother tempted her and said, well, you know what, you can stay here forever. Like the mother, the devouring mother in our actual world says, well, you don't have to leave home. You can have those great, delicious delights, in meals, forever. You can stay home forever. That's what she said. You can stay in the benevolent, paradisal ground, and you don't have to grow up. That's what she told her. You can sell your soul to the temptations that are being granted to you by the spirit of the devouring mother. That's what she was trying to communicate. And Coraline is like, okay, like, she just she had the message. She was kind of getting the message before, because before that the offer was made, she met the cat.
Yeah.
And the cat is actually, in Jungian terms, the cat is the symbol of the self. Is basically a guide, is the guardian, is the spirit that is the spirit that helps the individual grow and mature and develop. It's the process which acts as the developmental curve of the individual. This is what it is.
Really?
Yeah, absolutely. And Christ also is basically identified as the symbol of the self, and the symbol of the self is a very complex symbol. But it's in the movie, it's that, it's the instinct towards development, it's the instinct towards independence and freedom, and that's what the cat actually is. And
Okay.
there is also, to drive home the point, the cat itself says, she asks the cat for the name, and the cat says, I'm just a cat, I am that which I am. And this is exactly what God said in the Old Testament. I am that which I am, I am that which I am that. So it doesn't have a name, it's nameless. And the cat is the nameless in the movie. So it's basically like the guardian spirit of God in the religious sense, and in the psychological sense, it's the spirit that moves forward your development. Like, let's say, the God of the Old Testament is used in the same manner in the stories of the Old Testament. It's the guiding spirit, it's the guiding force. It's the spirit that destroys you and reincarnates you. Because the cat says, well, this reality here is not exactly what you think it is. And Coraline couldn't understand, of course. So she was basically attempting to shatter the false experience that she was being fed into that world. So she was basically a memory shatterer, a destroyer of the old paradigm and a bringer of a new perspective and of a new light, which would actually assist her in solving the problem that was there in that world. So she was offered to remove her soul. That was the mother. The mother gave her the offer, and she had like that in the back of her hand. The consciousness of how do you
Mm-hmm.
say, the religious instinct towards your development. Her development was basically bugging her in her own mind, from before.
Mm-hmm.
So she had that, to guide her in the making of that decision. She was basically very frightened, and she basically refused the calling of the mother. And what happens is, in the traditional sense, if you're in a family ground and you go against the contract that you were about to sign with the devouring mother or your own mother, you are in a place of hell, and you are gonna be in battle, because the mother, if
Mm-hmm.
depending on the degree of pathology, does not want you to leave.
Yeah.
She wants you to stay there
Mm-hmm.
forever. And she wants you to relinquish any other bonds and any other contracts that you have made with the outside world, of her outside world. This
Mm-hmm.
is that type of relationship, which is what happens after she refused. The whole world became all the more twisted, and until the final development of the ultimate twist, but the whole
Mm-hmm.
world was like basically completely wrapped. It was absolutely insane to watch, in the movie as it progressed. Like the visuals, deep visual development, of the whole world and the way that it was being decomposed.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Brilliant stuff. Brilliant but it's very terrifying when you're like a younger kid, because not because it's not real, but because it's exactly what's gonna happen if you are not careful with your relationship with your mother. That's exactly what happens.
So that's why we get scared.
Absolutely. The children have a very, probably depending on the children, because there is a personality difference, but they have a very strong
Mm-hmm.
connection to the unconscious. This is why they can talk to their animal friends. It's not,
Oh yeah.
obviously, I'm not saying that the animals can talk, but I'm
Yeah,
saying
yeah, yeah.
they have a deep connection, with the forces of their own, how can I say, of the of, within their own forces. That they are able to communicate with them a lot better than adults can,
Mm-hmm.
which is why Jesus said that you have to become like little children, because you have to have the sense of you have to have an integrated sense with your entire nature in order to be able to navigate the difficulties of your life. It's not something that you can do by being completely, how you say, completely devoid of the side of you in which you are not completely aware of. You have to
Mm-hmm.
have that close. You have to have
Yeah.
a relationship with it. This is what the dream is the line that connects the conscious reality with the unconscious reality, and the merging of the two, and possibly the transformation of the two. Because it's not like the unconscious is all knowing, and it's not like consciousness is all blind. It's a relationship, it's a bond, it's a string that develops, that wraps itself, and that it unwraps itself multiple times.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the developmental curve of the individual, is to find that line,
Yeah.
and to be able to emerge with it, and interact with it for as much as that is possible for their particular task. So
Mm-hmm.
what happens in the movie is that there's this initial conflict, and then what happens is that the ground is a little bit shaky, and then she goes through the mirror, and through the mirror she finds the three spirits. By the way, which the number three is actually
Mm-hmm.
very interesting. Again, like I said, like the story can be separated into like three main events, in the fourth one. And what happens is that
Mm-hmm.
there are three dead children, and Caroline would be the fourth. So,
Yeah.
so there is a synchronous element between the development of the movie and the main elements of it, which is the children. Basically, these are the main elements, is the children and the mother. But in this case, it's the children, I would say. So
Mm-hmm.
she finds the
Yeah.
three children, and she finds that they basically lost her soul because they accepted the offer of the mother. So what does it mean to lose your soul? You can imagine, like, you see people who are soulless, we use it usually to describe people who are overly materialistic, or who are very enwrapped in a very, how would you say, uninteresting and unengaging corporate environment. It's something like a place where life is just reduced to a very unidimensional way of being. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but in the, I would say, more like in the case of Coraline, it's something like they chose to forfeit the adventure of their life in pursuit of a perfect haven to hide from the dangers of maturation.
Yeah.
Because if you stay in the underworld, you are never going to wake up. You will always stay there, and you will never get to experience the development of your being. So this is one of the great temptations that happen with children, in all ages, one could say, is that capacity to basically break their spirit by convincing them that they're victims of the world, and by enticing them into a contract of forfeiting all personal responsibility for the adventure of their life. And that is a terrible fate to follow. And it's a
Mm-hmm.
very, very real one. So the story develops, and she basically comes into contact with those children, and the children ask her to be able to save their souls, and she says, "I will try." So she's being honest. So she's trying to communicate with them, and she's not trying to be arrogant or presumptuous, And in the beginning of the movie, she was more like that. Now she was being more grounded. So,
Mm-hmm.
and then she had to go through those three trials, in order to find all the children. And then the fourth one was to find her parents. Like I said, the movie has a very
Mm-hmm.
interesting pattern, there. So find the three souls, and then find the parents, and then you hypothetically get to escape. This was the
Yeah.
conditions. So she manages to get the two first souls, and then she gets stuck on the third, and the cat helps her grab the third one.
Mm-hmm.
So this is what happens: is that the moment you start to establish this more the stronger connection, and a stronger sense of relatability to the guiding spirit in you, you are able to overcome the hardest challenges that the world unfolds on you. So this is why I said it was the spirit of the developmental instinct, let's say. Well, it's not exactly
Mm-hmm.
right, but it's something like this in the individual, which is why the cat is such a pivotal role. She was also very useful in winning against the battle in the end, in the final arc with the
Yeah.
mother.
Because she used the cat.
But well, the cat was a trickster, in the movie, and in the end, Coraline just, like catapulted that trickstery, into
Mhm.
the into directly into the mother, which was like the
Yeah.
ultimate trickster, because the mother had this, the trickster archetype is a very weird archetype to describe, and
Mhm.
for example, Christ has like is like the hero, but at the same time is like the fool, because who in the world is the Son of God with ultimate unlimited power, who decides to let himself be crucified on a cross. Like,
Mm.
that's
Yeah.
there is an element of foolery in that, in one sense. It's
Mhm.
like there is an element of irony, there is an element of wonder. Like, if you're the Son of God, this is what they told him also when he was on the cross. Like, hey, like, bend the world to your will. This is what they asked him. It's like, who wouldn't do that? Who would blame you even for it? you know so there is a little
Mhm.
bit of trickster, in the self and the trickster are not opposites, are different archetypes, but in this case they are enveloped. And this is another complex thing. The archetypes are not just
Mhm.
unidimensional units. They can be manifold. They can have different combinations. It's like clothing. It's not like you can just wear red and then blue and then black. You can have a combination of those colors. That
Mhm.
doesn't invalidate the colors. It just complements them in ways that just make them more unique. So
Yeah.
this is why the cat is the self, in the same way that the self was depicted, which was analyzed by Jordan Peterson in the Pinocchio movie. The cricket was the voice of consciousness for Pinocchio, that was basically guiding him towards his adventure to becoming a real person. And Coraline was the cat. So,
Mhm.
and that's a similarity that you can think about for a bit. So what happens in the final
Okay.
act is that the mother became like this ultimate, like um like spider version, you know. Oh, sorry.
Mm-hmm. And she didn't have the eyes.
Yeah, sorry.
She didn't have eyes in the end,
But yeah,
right?
right, right. She got her buttons, you know, cut off, you know, from the
Mm-hmm.
cat, you know.
Yeah.
That's very interesting. I don't know how to interpret that, but I will tell you something that was before. You know, the cat and Coraline had a discussion, you know, and
Mm-hmm.
the discussion was that, you know, she asks, well, why would she do that? Why would she want to trap her? And then he gave her two answers to that, and he said, well, it's because she wants to find something that she can love,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
or she wants to find something to eat.
Oh, right. Yeah,
Right,
yeah, yeah.
right. So you understand that the interpretation here is as concrete as you can possibly get. It's not the the voice. The cat is actually the wisest character, you know, in the movie, and he's
Mm-hmm.
also the only one who is the bridge between the conscious world and the bridge between the unconscious. In the same way that, let's say, Christ or the Spirit of God is the bridge between the earthly world and the heavenly world. You know, it's exactly
Mm-hmm.
the bridge between the two. He's the bridge of the two. So the same way the cat is it's actually completely the same. Um,
What about the mice?
oh, the mice
They
have
also have a connection.
they do the when I was reading about the interpretation of fairy tales, the mice were basically um, they were basically they also had they had a relationship with the unconscious. They were depicted as the spirit animal as spirit animals of the unconscious, which is also why when she was talking to that Russian guy, which you remember the name and I don't, um,
Yeah.
Coraline, he told her, you know, the mice told me that you are in great danger, you know,
Mm-hmm.
which is why you know the characters were like they had like this weird knowledge, you know, of the underworld, you know, but they were adults, so they didn't have a very good relationship. But Coraline was a child, you know, and she had a perfect relationship with the unconscious,
Mm-hmm.
which is also why she was able to go into the other world. Um,
Yeah.
this happens in real life as well. Um, so you know also and you know like the place was kind of weird, you know, like the two witches the two women that she visited, which look like witches, are
Mm-hmm.
like actresses, and that guy was also in a circus. So the whole place is like a circus, you know. So things are a little bit on the
Yeah.
ridiculous side, you know, in in any way you want to look at it. uh,
Mm-hmm.
so she goes through the trials, she gets the eyes of the children, you know, and then she basically gets some gets a tip, you know, from the children who she saved, and the children told her, well, don't play the game fairly, you know, like this is not about winning fairly, you know, this is about getting
Mm-hmm.
able to save your parents, you know. Oh wait, what am I saying? This is the most important part of the film.
Yeah.
In the same, do you remember what happens Pinocchio? Yeah, I will go to
Mm-hmm.
Pinocchio and then I will go back to Coraline, because those two have actually a very strong relationship between them. So Pinocchio gets out of his father's home, you know, does all the mischief, and then he searches for his father in his home and he cannot find him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Coraline does the same thing. She goes into the underworld. She almost replaces her actual parents with second-rate, corrupt representations, fake representations of them, and then
Mm-hmm.
they're actually captured by the spirit by the spirits of the unconscious. And then Caroline has to go again to the underworld, not this time not to enjoy the the pleasure island, but this time to rescue her parents from the catacombs of the evil queen.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
this is what happens in the movie, and she does so successfully.
Mm-hmm.
And
And unfairly.
yeah, I mean, hey, she was you can use, you know, there is a very great, there's a great irony, you know, when you watch in specific movies where there's like a battle between, let's say, the forces of consciousness and the force of consciousness, or the forces of good versus evil. And this is like the good forces have to in some sense use the same weapons that the other side is using in order to combat it. So in order to be able to master shadows, you have to have a close relationship to your own. It's something like this.
Yeah.
So she used trickery against her because you need to have the trickery in order to not be deceived, in order to be able to escape from those.
Agree.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
right. All of that. So
Okay.
she goes back into the world, and
Mm-hmm.
the cat cannot speak because the cat can only speak in the underworld. The cat, like the dream, can only speak when you are not awake.
Mm-hmm.
In most cases. So
Yeah.
she goes into the world. And she has like this one final confrontation with like the lingering. So here's something that's interesting about the movie. Um, the other mother doesn't die.
Yeah.
The other mother is
Exactly.
sealed.
Mm-hmm.
She is constrained from interrupting the relationship between the bridge that has been created between the conscious and the unconscious. Because Coraline is, because in the end, Coraline graduates in some sense. Coraline is able to awaken, is able to return from the underworld victorious because she has actually mastered the underworld. She has mastered the evil queen. But the evil queen, as it's being shown in the end, is alive and well. And it continues to live there, and she will always continue to live
Mm-hmm.
there. And then what Caroline does is, in the end of the movie, is basically tells her story, to the adults about what happened. And obviously, they don't believe her because adults are not very bright and understanding the wisdom of children. But she at least has the information out there, imprinted into their memory, regardless of how bizarre the whole thing and the whole affair may have been.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
so this is what Caroline is about, is the exploration of the underworld, is the overcoming of the temptation of the devouring mother, and it's basically and transcendence over the pathological familial situation. This is the
Mm-hmm.
this is a very, very compact, version of the whole story.
Mm-hmm. What
So
about the key and the well?
what about, sorry?
The key and the well. In the end, she had to throw the key at the bottom of the well.
I've read somewhere when I was on Reddit and I was looking for um, theories, mysteries, and other fun fiction about Caroline, and I found somewhere that said that the little wells, those wells, were
Mm-hmm.
basically a representation in fairy tales or in this type of movie environments of the. I don't remember. I think it was a representation of the dream world, something like this. I don't remember exactly.
Okay.
I have to find that article on Reddit because that was very interesting when I was finding that. And obviously, that's the same as the underworld. That's the same as the
Mm-hmm.
unconscious. All of those are basically synonymous, in the symbolic sense. So,
Yeah.
well, that's what happens when you encounter the evil queen, and you overcome her. You're sealing her away, and
Mm-hmm.
you are making sure to keep the forces of the underworld steady. You cannot
Yeah.
eradicate them. You can just keep them from erupting and from corrupting everything on the surface, which is what she did
Mm-hmm.
about when she locked her basically on the well. So as the as the how do you say as the apprentice, let's say, of the cat, or as the apprentice of the as the apprentice, she becomes the new guide, let's say, which
Mm-hmm.
crosses the bridge between the conscious and the unconscious, and she's also the one to seal, let's say, the and to seal the disruption that the unconscious can bring, into the world, by being a communicator about it and by sealing the spirit that is inhibited there.
Okay.
So
Okay.
it's a very complex story, and I will just close by saying this. Coraline is, for me, what I really found very amusing, or maybe not amusing, interesting about the devouring mother, is that it's very prevalent today,
Mm-hmm.
and the prevalence is probably due to probably it's as a consequence of the initiation of the feminine element into the political landscape. and into the social landscape and into the workplace landscape. So what happens is that um, the balance of the genders in some sense has been shifted, so now the gender categories and the gender and the responsibility of the genders has somehow been like tinkered with. So it's a little bit more
Mm-hmm.
unstable now. So, and our overwhelming wealth has created environments, not that this is specifically a new phenomenon, but it's a growing phenomenon of people who are bedridden, home-ridden, homestuck, sealed, from the world. and
Mm-hmm.
and this is not something to be put at the feet of women or of mothers. This is to be put at the feet of our current generation, because our current generation is being devoured, not by an exogenous element, not by the mother that you have, but by the failed establishment of the relationship between our our nature, I would say. So have you seen
Mm-hmm.
let me give you some examples. So for me, there are some very weird things that are going on right now that I don't think they are the standard of what, let's say, of humanity as such. So we have a generation where the feminine is being demonized. There is a group of people who are called the red pill, and they have
Yeah.
a desire to basically brand the feminine as the parasitical, tyrannical element that is basically going to rob you of all of your resources, and it's going to leave you, dead in the water, with no support, because it's just ruthless and cares about hypergamy and reproduction. And this is
Mm-hmm.
a terrible, miscategorization of women as such, because that's not all women, that's
Mm-hmm.
some women.
Mm-hmm.
And they are trying to they're trying to put this obscure generality and in order to feed it to young people. And what this happens is it doesn't produce people who are actually educated about the negative aspect of the feminine. Is a phenomenon which creates people who are pathologically opposed to the idea of having any sort of connection with the feminine. But if you don't have any connection with the feminine, with your own feminine or with the feminine in the other gender, then
Mm-hmm.
you are stuck in the same place that Caroline was, because you don't have that connection. You're only underwater, all the time. Not
Yeah.
in a good place though. So
Yeah.
the incel generation we're living in is a direct consequence of this failure of this devouring, of the failure of establishing this essential connection with our own nature, with our own spiritual unconscious, let's say. I don't want to use very weird words here, but this is one way to view it. What about women? They're not marrying anymore. Most of them remained unmarried and unwed,
Mm-hmm.
unmarried, unwed, and without children. At 30 and possibly even afterwards, and most of them are going to regret it. I make a post on TikTok, that said
Mm-hmm.
that women after 30, like, I was wondering what exactly is your child gonna is your life gonna be. Yeah, and all the comments were like, it's like the
Yeah.
most pagan, like ridiculous worship of pleasure that you can imagine. The whole comments were
Mm-hmm.
basically from women who basically, I'm not saying that some people are not unfit for it, or that they're not, they do not have the necessary prerequisites, financial or emotional, in order to invest in a child. I'm not saying there are not people like this, but this mass phenomenon that's occurring right now is an indication
Mm-hmm.
of a great illness that is going on in our culture. And the great illness is that we are basically, how can I say, I don't think there is any difference between a woman rejecting her call to childbearing and rejecting the call of her life. I
Okay.
I think it's the same thing, because I haven't. There are very few cases where you hear someone having children and deeply regretting it. They may have
Mm-hmm.
regretted circumstances, but not the child itself. That's a rare person, but it's becoming less rare. And this is because of the culture of the internet, where everyone is having basically the archetypal perfect life, like you have in
Mm-hmm.
Caroline, by the way, because the Instagram is like a portal into the fantasy land, but it's not the real land,
Yeah.
because those people are fake. There's nothing real
Mm-hmm.
about the Instagram model that you're seeing. It's one edited, well edited, person with somewhat perhaps good body, which is under the perfect lighting, and is basically advertising themselves in the best possible capacity to attract to keep fueling the lifestyle that they have already. There is nothing in that is heroic or and there's no appreciation on my side, for such a life lived. It's a very
Yeah.
it's a very limited and short and a very limited existence. So you have the crisis on the men's side, you have the crisis on the women's side. Um, you have like this urge from the environmentalists to basically annihilate our basic sources of energy, which is there's no difference between doing that and killing everyone, or at least forestalling the development for forestalling or eradicating or reducing the development in developing countries, in the economic development of developing countries, third world countries, because when you limit the way that you can use energy, you limit your amount of total resources, and that is going to reduce the amount of practical aid that you can give to those who actually need it the most, not only in third world countries, but even in your own country with the people that are actually in dispossessed categories. So
Yeah.
all of those things, although they're separate, have also a common denominator into them. But I was more talking about the incel crisis, because it's really quite a phenomenon, to see men, resigning from the desire to meet women and to interact with them, because the main idea there is that the feminine has been demonized, but it also has been exaggerated to a degree which is which is as terrifying as the spider transformation of of the other mother. It's as terrifying,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
we really have to understand that, for me at least, that the digital world is a world where there is a great power, but there is also a great danger. There is a great temptation to just remain in the infinite loop of information sucking, and that can actually suck and devour your entire soul. So I think this is the digital transformation that we have has also created, or at least exaggerated, a spiritual crisis, that has been felt for, as far as I can tell, after the Second World War, which is that we need to find a new source of enlightenment, in order to guide our life, because the materialistic world is not the materialistic world. The excessive demands of a consumeristic culture with its benefits are not really fulfilling a spiritual destiny for the people and the generation which is being lived right now. And if our generation is not able to establish this connection and this bond, well, then
Yeah.
then we're going to devour ourselves in the end. We're not gonna need another mother to do that. We do that to ourselves. It's gonna be our other self who is going to devour us. So, and we are already
Okay.
seeing the consequences of that, and we might as well run into run into the adventure of our lives without the how would you say, the unrealistic expectations of a materialistic full life, I would say, because that is a very big problem. So men are mostly intimidated by women for one reason, is because they are not capable of getting the amount of financial resources which would make them attractive in their own mind. So for example, I think I saw a poll, and it was like, how much money would you need to be well off, and the poll said something like 200,000 a year. What do you
Okay.
mean? 200,000 a year? You don't need that much money in order to
Yeah.
operate and to be able to have a good life. With two incomes, if you have 50 or 60 or 70,000 euros, you are pretty well fine, and you can do even less. So,
Yeah.
not unrealistic. People say freedom. But I've seen people who, in my life, who have stopped working for prolonged periods, and they were, let's say, were on government aid. And let me tell you, they were not experiencing freedom. They were basically sucked into the digital world and robbed of all their creativity and all of their sort of their life force. So, and there were people who would tell me, well, if I had this extra time, I would do so many things, and they didn't do anything. And it's the same thing has happened also in my experience when I had prolonged vacations. It's like if you don't have something to ground you, you're going to float, and maybe you don't want to go where the wind is blowing, you know. So
Yeah.
so this is the part of the presentation that interested me the most. Do you have any specific remarks or something that gripped your attention, which I didn't let you express?
I think mostly I like the idea that the devouring mother is actually ourselves, our other self. So you mean that our tendencies with consumerism and the digital world is the things that lead lead us towards that outcome, right?
Well, every
Or
generation has its own temptations and crises, you know, and
mm-hmm.
the whole world has exaggerated, I would say, a very, how do you say, a very pagan lifestyle, you know. Like there is
Yeah.
this, for me personally, it doesn't have so much appeal, you know, because I don't
Mm-hmm.
really understand what's the whole point, you know, of gathering all these exogenous experiences. So perhaps people like to travel, but another part of me, you know, which is a little bit more on the pessimistic side, says I don't know whether, I'm cautiously
Mm-hmm.
saying this, I don't know whether people like to travel or whether they like to travel to showcase their travel.
Yeah.
I've seen a person, you know, who spent, you know, one of the girls I was talking about to you, who spends like 3,000, 4,000 euros on vacations, you know, and she doesn't even have her own home and she lives with her parents, you know, and
Yeah.
her only achievement in life is that she has a vibrant Instagram in order to showcase to the world. That is not any,
Mm-hmm.
that is not really any creative achievement to me, and this is just the symptom, you know, of a self-devouring culture, like
Mm.
this obsession with idols, you know, with idol worship, you know. Literally, the Instagram models and those people, they're called idols.
Yeah,
It's not
true.
it's not even a metaphor. It's literally, or models, you know, model idol is the same thing. A model, you know, a model, an artificial model,
Yeah.
like it's the same word, and we're worshiping those things, but there's nothing in them. There is no spiritual white. There is no substance out of that, because if there
Mm-hmm.
was, then people would actually be willing to live their life, but they're not. They're just sticking on the phone, you know. The average person has like 4 or 7 hours a day on the phone, you know. What
Yeah,
are you doing
true.
there? To do what? You know, being productive, you know. No, you're not. You're not. If you have Instagram on your phone and it says 4 hours, you're not being productive. You're sucked into the the insane spiral of real sucking, you know. And
Mm-hmm.
you're being squeezed out of every cent of your time that you have on those particular moments, you know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And we miss the spiritual part, right?
Yeah, there is a great spiritual crisis because we are living in an age and culture where the idea of God is lost, you know, and
Mm-hmm.
we are too we are too pretentious, you know, to be able to think about the concept of God in any other way than the way that was interpreted, you know, in more ancient times, or let's say even 200 years ago. We're very pretentious. We're not giving any benefit of the doubt to our ancestry, you know, which were responsible for building a great deal of things, of marvelous things, with even half of our technology, and they did, and they sustained
Yeah.
that, and they prolonged that, and they planted the seeds in the soil in which we walk on. So there is a great deal of ungratefulness towards that, and every time that you see someone going against a traditional path in life, if they're not doing that carefully and with full awareness of their own personal situation, what you're seeing is that they're basically having a sort of revenge, you know, on the ancestral spirits in which cultivated
Mm-hmm.
the land in which they walk right now. And there is a great deal of ungratefulness into that. So Nietzsche said that God was dead. What he meant was that our spiritual, metaphysical um, substructures, let's say, of our thoughts had collapsed, and that meant was that we didn't have a justification anymore for our beliefs and systems and moral systems. So, for example, you could say that something is good and evil because God exists, but once you start believing that, then you can just derive some your notions of morality become very constrained.
Mm-hmm.
You know? So And then you don't, and
Yeah.
if you don't have a moral compass, if you don't have
Mm-hmm.
like a way of communally agreeing on a set of of a priori presuppositions on how to operate in a given group, then you don't know how to communicate. You lose your language, you lose your soul, you can't really do anything. So,
Mm-hmm.
and the degree to which we are able to do that is because we are actually walking on the shoulders of our ancestors, and we are
Mm-hmm.
profiting from the view in which, and the real estate in which that view has provided to us.
Yeah. Okay. That is very interesting. And the whole idea, I didn't expect it to go that way.
Yeah, me neither. It was more like you know trying to adapt into
Mm-hmm.
this is what happens when you're trying to do literary analysis, because it's never about some obscure story that happened in one no, there's always an element into the story in which it has some strong association with a current crisis. And so, for example, this is why
Mm-hmm.
Fight Club was so popular, which is so popular even after what 20 years of its production, 15 years of its production. It's
Yeah.
one of the most popular movies. And there is a great
Mm-hmm.
literary and archetypal symbolism in that as well. I'm not gonna go there.
Mm-hmm.
We're gonna take another 20, 30 minutes. So, but yeah, the stories have
Okay.
something to say. They have a message in the same way that the dream has a message. If you actually pay attention and you're not too arrogant, in your conscious pre-assumptions, oh, it's just
Mm-hmm.
a bundle of like scenes, episodic memories which have no relation to one another. Yeah, but you could say the
Mm-hmm.
same about the movie if you watched in any way other than the way that it's supposed to be watched. So the same goes for dreams. If you don't take them seriously enough, you're not going to be able to understand the pattern, and you're not going to be able to have a relationship with them. So
Yeah. Okay.
that's it for that.
Thank you. Thank you for the analysis.
No, no
That
worries.
was very interesting.
No, no worries. That's great. I think that's enough for today.
Okay. I was glad to have this conversation.
Me too. We'll have another one next time, okay? I'm going to
Perfect.
think of a topic and then we can talk about it again.
Okay. Yeah. 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 Perfect.
So that's good. Let's close for today.
Goodbye.